Today we're going to be making a crysknife from the new Dune movies. I'm going to be resin printing this prop, and I'll be using my Mars 4 Ultra that Elegoo very kindly sent over for me to try out for my projects. It is a smaller printer, so I'll be splitting the blade into pieces, which I did directly in Lychee. Normally for something like this, I would probably add key pieces to better align and attach everything, but we're going to be using some special resin that means keeping the blade pieces solid and flat would be the best option. I know I could have used a larger resin printer for a single piece blade, but if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll probably have noticed that these smaller machines are by far my most used size of resin printer. They're also the size that many of you probably have if you have an SLA printer in your workshop, and I wanted to show that you can still make quite large prop pieces easily, even with a smaller machine. I wanted to take this project a step further and use a custom resin mix to print the pieces in. I mixed white, translucent, and some Superflex resin together to make what I'm going to call worm tooth white. The crysknife blade is supposed to be made out of a sandworm tooth, and it appears like it should have a slightly transparent quality to it. It's something that you can't replicate with paint, and it was easy enough to mix up a transparent white resin to use as the base. The print took just under 9 hours to complete, and that was pretty much maxing out the height build volume of this machine. Once everything had finished printing, it was time to clean up the pieces. The one thing with adding flexible resin into your mix is that it can make support removal interesting. They won't just break off like a standard resin print would because it will stretch and flex with the piece. As usual, I'm using my heat gun pen to help me, and that definitely makes things easier, but you still need to be careful as you can accidentally rip the print if there are thinner areas. Sometimes cutting away any excess supports is the best way to go. Unfortunately, the resin color doesn't make this the easiest to see, but all of the fine details on these pieces printed beautifully. The last prep step, of course, is curing all of the parts. Again, due to the added flexible resin, you really don't want to over-cure these pieces as they will lose their flexibility and become brittle. Here's just how flexible the cured pieces are. I mostly wanted this for the blade to prevent any accidental cracks or chips while I work on it, which is also why I couldn't add keying pieces because you'd be able to see them through the translucent blade. But now it's time to attach these blade pieces together. I cut this smaller section in the center because it was lower than where I really needed the blade to stay transparent and above where all of the fine engraving details start. It was going to be the perfect place to make these joints disappear. To hide the seams, I'm using the same resin that I used to print the pieces in so that it would match the color and flexibility of the rest of the parts. I used some pretty rough sandpaper and also some files to help smooth out the added resin, but to also keep that scratchy texture that the blade already had. Next was on to priming these pieces for painting. The first piece that I painted was this wooden grip piece that I primed a matte black. Next was the silver outer part of the handle that I used a high gloss lacquer because I knew I wanted to paint this in Duralumin. So once the primer had dried, I also added that. And for the blade, obviously I didn't want to completely paint it to keep the transparency of the resin, but I did want to use a very similar color to sort of prime the lower portion of the blade that's closer to the handle, and also to help hide those seam lines since you could see them a little bit compared to the complete transparency of the rest of the pieces. And then I went ahead and started adding a darker gray color closer to where the base and handle of the knife is. And everything after that was just hand painting. I started with the wood grip portion of the handle and dry brushed some brown onto that, gradually building up the color so that the highest points of the grip were a very obvious chocolate brown. I then decided to assemble the two handle pieces together so that they were in one piece while I went in with my black wash to just really help define all of those inset recessed detail parts. So definitely all over that wood grip, really make that texture pop, as well as along the recessed parts of the silver portion of the handle. I then went in with that same black wash into the lower portion of the blade to really make those engraving details come out. And also to make this blade look not so pristine and that it's actually seen and gone through some battles. The final step was attaching the blade to the handle, but I think this knife really needs a nice display stand. I printed the base stand that actually comes with this file, which is the Atreides house crest in PLA, but we're gonna make this thing look like stone, so I'm using this wood filler to texturize this entire piece. Really just slathering it on and then going over it while it dries to make like a nice crumpled up stone-like texture. And then it was time to prime and paint that, so I started out with a gray primer. I figured a nice mid-tone would be a good place to start, and then went in with some light tan and brown colors to get it more like the rock color that you tend to see in the Dune movies. I did specifically put this on pretty splotchy just so that I had a nice variance in color so that it looked really nice and natural. I then went in with that black wash all over the piece to bring out more of that stone-like texture. I then dry brushed all of the base parts that were like around the actual raised crest area because I knew I wanted to actually paint the crest in this nice rusty brownish red color. And here is the final crysknife.